Hey guys, do you want to get depressed? Me too. Let's talk about DC video games. So, that you remember that Wonder Woman game that got announced? It's been canceled because the Warner Brothers sucks. So this is coming from Bloomberg. Jason Schreier is reporting that Warner Brothers Discovery Inc. is closing 3 video game studios and halting work on a highly anticipated Wonder Woman title in a bid to boost the profitability of its interactive entertainment business. I understand that it is a business, of course. Video games are not grown on trees, they are made to make money. But it's just like reading a paragraph like that where it's like, yeah, we canceled this game because of profitability and stocks and shareholders, and it just is kind of soul crushing. But anyways, God, this next paragraph is so just. The cuts reflect a refocusing of the games division on major franchises such as Harry Potter, Mortal Kombat, Game of Thrones, and DC Comics, primarily Batman. So, like, what that means is that Warner Brothers is looking at the current state of the video games industry where, like, these studios, these publishers, I guess, they are just like desperately seeking to make these like massive fucking games that sell like 20 million copies, or they're like desperately trying to make these live service games in this pathetic attempt to become the next Fortnite. And it's just like I really think that this race to the top is just so damaging to the games industry. And like you would have hoped that Warner Brothers would have learned their lesson after the complete and utter failure of Justice League and the complete and utter failure of Gotham Knights, and gone, all right, you know what? What if we scale back a bit? Like, what if we start making some smaller games that can be modest successes? But it's just like, nope. We need to make major franchise games. We need to make more Hogwarts Legacies with Harry Potter. We need to build out Mortal Kombat. We need to capitalize on Game of Thrones and DC Comics, but only Batman. Only Batman games. And yeah, I mean, just reading even further, it's like the quality of too many of our new releases has really missed the mark. JB Perrette, head of games and streaming for Warner Brothers, wrote in the memo. We need to make some substantial changes to our portfolio/team structure if we are to commit to the necessary resources to get back to a fewer but bigger franchises strategy. Like, what's weird about it is just that Wonder Woman is like it is a major franchise. Like, I don't even know what they're talking about. It's like if you make a good Wonder Woman game, that should sell like I feel like a couple million copies, like wouldn't it? But what's I guess what's frustrating about it is that they need these games to sell 10 million copies, 20 million copies. I think Hogwarts Legacy sold like 23 million copies. And it's just like it's like I feel like don't they understand that like the success of Hogwarts Legacy is not like the norm for video games. It's like I don't even think that a Hogwarts Legacy sequel is going to sell 23 million copies, because I feel like Hogwarts Legacy was just like this like unique game of like a really cool Harry Potter game that satisfies your urge to be a student at Hogwarts. But it's like I don't even know that the sequel is going to sell that many copies. Batman at its height, I think, only really sold like 10 million copies. The Arkham franchise. Like at this point, is Game of Thrones gonna sell tens of millions of copies? It's just real. It's just so disappointing to like to see them take just like seemingly all the wrong lessons from Suicide Squad and Gotham Knights. I mean, hopefully at least they don't try to make any of these a live service. And what sucks about this as well is that when you actually like read into what their decision making is, it's just so stupid. So apparently Warner Brothers Montreal, the people that made uh Batman Arkham Origins, apparently they were working on a Flash game, right? It says here in this article, a game based on the Scarlet Speedster had the potential to introduce thrilling mechanics. It could have been a much needed reinvention for DC's gaming portfolio. But then the movie bombed. Despite the anticipation surrounding the Flash film, particularly due to Michael Keaton's return as Batman, the movie struggled at the box office, failing to recoup its massive production and marketing budget. This financial failure sent ripples through Warner Brothers' entire DC slate, affecting not just upcoming films, but also video game projects tied to the franchise. With the film's underperformance signaling weak consumer interest, Warner Brothers pulled the plug on the game, leaving it as yet another casualty of the studio's uncertain approach to its DC properties. And then apparently Warner Brothers Montreal is working on a Game of Thrones game. I just, like, the Flash movie, there's just like so much more context surrounding the Flash movie. First of all, it was a part of a flailing DCEU. Like, audiences had just completely lost interest in the DC extended universe. So all of their movies were just flailing at the box office. I don't think you can specifically blame Flash for that, right? Second of all, it was just a terrible movie. It's like, yeah, sometimes if you make a terrible movie, it might bomb at the box office. Wow, shocker. Like, if The Flash had been like a fantastic film and it had flopped at the box office, then you might have something there. But it's like, really, you're going to cancel a game because a bad movie didn't succeed? Ridiculous. And then third of all, you like box office success does not translate to video game sales necessarily, and vice versa. Like, big video game success doesn't necessarily translate to box office success. Like, let's look over here at Detective Pikachu just as a case study. So the last Pokemon game has sold around 25 million copies as of March 2024. It's probably like way more than that now. So Pokemon is like a massive franchise. Detective Pikachu only made like $450 million at the box office. Now, don't get me wrong. $450 million. That is a success. I'm not saying it flopped. But like, if these things were so correlative to one another, you would have assumed that Detective Pikachu would have like easily crossed the $1 billion mark. But it's like around the same success level as the Sonic movies. And obviously Pokemon is like a much bigger deal than Sonic, at least in the video game world. Why are you canceling games based off of box office failures, especially when there's so much more context surrounding them? And so like, it really does make me wonder, like, I mean, listen, if it was the case that the Wonder Woman game just wasn't coming together, well, that's fine. Like, I like, sure. And if the game is, if you really think that the game is just going to end up being bad, then I guess it's fine if you canceled it. But if they ended up canceling it just because they don't think that, oh, Wonder Woman is popular enough, that's so stupid. Like, just to be clear, like, if we want to play these stupid box office games, the first Wonder Woman movie made more money than the last Matt Reeves Batman movie. Just to be clear. The first Wonder Woman movie made like $800 something million. The Batman made like $700 something million. And the second Wonder Woman movie only flopped because A, it came out during the pandemic, and B, they put it on HBO Max day and date, and C, it was just a bad movie. Like, if you make a good Wonder Woman game, it'll probably be fairly successful. I It's just all so stupid. And it's just like, dude, I yeah, you know what? Let's get into the next segment here. Like, what does the future of Warner Brothers games look like, and is there any hope? The one thing that kind of gives me hope, to some extent, is the fact that I wonder how involved James Gunn is ultimately going to be in all of this. Because apparently James Gunn and Peter Safran are like meeting with Rocksteady in NetherRealm. So it says here, we work incredibly closely with JB Perrette, who runs that division, said Safran, that being the games division. It's really the first time it's ever been this way at Warner Brothers. James and I sit with the guys that run the studios under JB, whether it's NetherRealm or Rocksteady. We sit with them and we talk about characters and stories that we're interested in and that they're interested in. We see designs for the projects in their very earliest stages, said Gunn. We talk about those, we talk about what the story might be, and we'll say, well, you maybe want to go this way because we're planning on maybe doing something with this character. As for when we'll actually begin to see what the video games in the DCU look like, Gunn confirmed that it will be a couple years from now. So it, like, I don't know, like, none of this necessarily confirms that Rocksteady or NetherRealm, which if you don't know NetherRealm, they're the guys that make Mortal Kombat and Injustice. None of this actually confirms whether or not any of their games are going to actually be in the DCU. But I mean, if you actually like look at all of the facts here, James Gunn is intending on making DCU games. If Warner Brothers Montreal is working on a Game of Thrones game, if whatever the Hogwarts Legacy studio is presumably working on a Harry Potter game, of those studios that Warner Brothers owns, it's like they really only have Rocksteady or NetherRealm that could be potentially working on a DCU game. I doubt it's going to be NetherRealm, because if they're making another game, it's going to be a fighting game, and like, well, I don't really know what the point of making a DCU specific fighting game would be. So that leaves Rocksteady. So that kind of leads me to assume that Rocksteady is going to be making a DCU Batman game. And I don't think I hate that idea, actually. Here's the reality, right? After Suicide Squad killed the Justice League, Rocksteady is no longer the same Rocksteady that made the Arkham franchise, right? Like, and by the way, people do misconstrue that. Like, a lot of people act like the studio that exists right now, people act like they are the ones that made Suicide Squad, and that the original people that were working at Rocksteady are somehow not responsible for Suicide Squad. It's very weird the way that people talk about it. Here's the truth, and this is a truth that not a lot of people want to accept. The guys that made the Arkham trilogy made Suicide Squad. Right? The guy that wrote the Arkham trilogy wrote Suicide Squad. The reality is that Rocksteady made a bad game, and then they bailed at the last minute, right? Like, the studio founders, they like bailed a year before the game came out. And so that's not to like defend this new iteration of Rocksteady, but it's just to say that to some extent they're kind of unproven, right? Like they themselves haven't made a game yet. So if you're a new Rocksteady, do you really want to just make another Arkham game? Because that's not your property. I actually don't hate the idea of this new version of Rocksteady, you know, playing it safe, right? Going back to Batman, but not just making another Arkham game. Make a Batman DCU game. Now, how would you go about that? What they definitely shouldn't do is they shouldn't have it be that, you know, James Gunn makes his DCU Batman movie, and then the DCU Batman game takes place in between the first movie and the second movie, And James Gunn is like, all right, you guys have to make this game by this specific date because your game is going to set up the next movie. So you got to hit this deadline. And like, they definitely shouldn't do anything like that. If I were like running DC, this is what I would do. I would say, okay, we know we're making a Damian Wayne game, so that means that we have somewhat of an older Batman, right? At least late 30s, early 40s. So this is a Batman with like a big history of crime fighting. If I were running DC, I would go to Rocksteady and be like, okay, our Batman is like 42 years old. You know, you have like 20 years of him Batmaning to experiment with and to explore. That's your Batman, right? That is your area to explore with and build out our DCU lore. That's how I would approach it, right? Approach it in kind of like the way that Star Wars does its world building, where the Jedi Survivor games are in the Star Wars canon, but the universe is so vast that they've kind of just like taken their little chunk of Star Wars and they're able to explore everything within it. That's how I would handle it. So that way, the DCU Batman game is not on like a time crunch to correlate with whatever they're doing in the movies. They're relatively segregated. They're relatively separated from one another. I think that could work actually. Now, else would I do if I were James Gunn and if I were just Warner Brothers games in general? Dude, start licensing your IP out to other studios. It really does feel like if James Gunn wants to be serious about making DC games like a serious thing, I don't think that the studios that Warner Brothers have internally are enough. And like, dude, don't make everything just this big all or nothing thing where it's like, yeah, we got to go all in on this massively budgeted Batman game, and guess what? If this massively budgeted Batman game doesn't sell like 10 million copies, it only, God forbid, sells like 4 million copies. Well, then the studio is shuttered. It's like the games industry in general is just way too big, and it is like way too risky in these massively budgeted games that they're making that take so fucking long to make, right? Like development cycles nowadays are like 6 to 9 years, and it's just like that's just too much. Man, if I were James Gunn, I would be like, hey, let's go to like the Ghost Runner developers, right? They make these like first person high, like fast paced like shooter, like first person like shooter games, I think, but they're like really fast paced. I would go to like those guys and I'd be like, hey, here's like $20 million. Make a Green Arrow game. And do little things along like that along with your massively budgeted Batman games. So I don't know. I will, but again, I do have some amount of faith that James Gunn is doing all of this because just the way that James Gunn is running the movie and TV side of things, it seems really promising, right? Like the fact that James Gunn isn't like rushing these projects out. He's going like, hey, we're not going to greenlight and start shooting a movie until the script is where we want it to be. And it's like that is the environment that an interconnected universe with video games could potentially work, right? If they're allowed to let the developers cook and they're not having it conflict with the filmmaking process, there is some amount of hope there. But I mean, at the end of the day, who really knows? we will have to wait and see. But yeah, let me know what you think about any and all of this in the comments down below, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.